LPT, go ahead and take that raise into a higher tax bracket. You'll still be bringing home more money than before. Only the money above the old tax bracket will be taxed at the higher rate. If you were making $99,999 per year and you got a raise to $100,001, a $2 per year raise, only the $2 would get taxed at the higher rate. So don't worry, and may you get a raise in 2023. Edit. Believe it or not, progressive taxation is not common knowledge. That's why I posted it. I tried to be clear and concise.
It's staggering the amount of people I've run into that thought they'd lose money by breaking the
I always think this is common knowledge by now, but every year I overhear at least one person IRL say some version of how they would end up with less if they made more because of I noticed people mentioning this, so I'll add it for visibility. There are social assistance programs that do work this way, where making a little more could mean completely cutting the assistance, resulting in a net loss. I think this is why people get confused, and conflate it with the tax brackets.
My boss once tried to tell me that he gave me a lower raise than promised because he was doing me a favor. You know, he got out the calculator and found out I'd make less money going into the higher tax bracket. I told him I was insulted by the raise and his assumption that I was a complete that didn't know how taxes work, and that I going to go home and never come back to work again if he didn't make me up a new pay stub and send the balance by the end of the day. It worked. Never be afraid for your job.
I grew up being told it was always good to be paying more in taxes because it meant you were making more.
My parents misunderstood this almost their entire lives and went to ridiculous lengths to keep their personal income from going into the next tax bracket, thinking that they'd lose money if they did.
I always misunderstood this until I finally clawed my way out of the bottom bracket. When that raise came, I panicked at the idea of actually making less money and wondered why anyone would accept a raise under that condition. It didn't make sense, so I decided to research it, and learned, at far too advanced an age, about what you have shared are people who have an interest in having others believe that higher tax brackets tax all your income at the bracket rate, so I hope your post enlightens someone who was deceived as I was.
If your job is middle, upper class, sure, but if you're a retail waggy, it may cost you government benefits, income-restricted housing that are worth more than the increase in pay.
One thing to consider for this is social benefits. Let's say that there's a social benefit you receive is only allowed for people with an income of less than $60,000. If your raise puts you above that amount, you need to carefully consider if the raise is worth losing this benefit.
It's mostly true, but there are absolutely situations where just earning, say, $1 more has ramifications that can hurt you more than the extra $1 helps. ACA cliffs are a good example. There's a lot of government cheese that gets phased out once it's established you're not. It's definitely a dumb long-term strategy to try and stay poor, to get more handouts.
There is actually a benefits cliff you can fall out of that can hurt lower income people. But that is not really a tax bracket issue.
I recently was offered a job that would provide a significant increase in my wages. It's a $90,000 increase. My wife tried saying that once my tax bracket goes up and the city taxes I'd be paying since it's in a major city, it wouldn't be worth the effort. She genuinely thought a $90,000 increase would be consumed by taxes and expenses. She got a nice math and econ lesson that day.
The welfare cliff is real though.
I was one of those people until just now. The American education system does not prioritize this stuff.
I went to law school with a guy who took a federal income tax class with me who still didn't understand income and graduated tax brackets years after we graduated.
The only time this can actually be the case in the US is if you're on the threshold of certain social assistance. Making another $20 a week isn't worth losing eligibility for WIC, for example. Lotta people get if they tow over those income limits without making enough of a jump over them. But that's not a tax issue so much as flaws in these plans by not graduating the assistance by income and just hard cutting them off.
I think it sticks around because of the benefits cliff. For most forms of welfare, you lose it entirely if you make $1 over the eligibility limit, creating a net financial loss that keeps people in poverty. It's especially bad for people with disabilities. Also, you could get a tax cliff in certain situations like tuition and fee deductions and the earned income tax credit. It's just that the higher tax bracket part on its own is
My sister tried to explain to me that her boyfriend's boss him over by giving out a larger than expected bonus before Christmas instead of after the new year. I've never seen so many things wrong with one statement from someone I actually know.
Was there even the slightest possibility that your boss was just a complete that didn't know how taxes worked and thought he was helping you? There's a lot of people that really think that way.
Someone I went to high school with, who wasn't known for being too bright, eventually started their own business after high school, and was completely shocked when I pointed out how Bernie Sanders' top tax rate proposal that they were complaining about wouldn't hurt them, and in fact would help them. They were in complete disbelief about how marginal tax rates work. They ended up blocking me later when I kept politely pointing out their posts about Trump's comments made no sense whatsoever.
Well, yeah.
Generally, yes. There's some fine details about how you're making more, or strategy when it comes to being married and filing jointly.
To expand on this, there are government benefits that have a hard income cutoff. Things like free or reduced meal plan at public schools, coverage of your children by Medicaid, food stamps, things like that. If you make more than the cutoff, you can lose those benefits. So if you get $100 raise but you lose a benefit worth several thousand a year, you come out making less.
Years ago I got a small bonus at the end of the year, ended up being just enough to put me over the max income to claim my student loan interest. Taking the bonus ended up costing me money. One of the only instances where taking more money wasn't worth the tax impact.
Some people don't understand that.
I'm assuming this is like in the UK where benefits have a hard cut-off. But generally it still works out better with pay rises, if you're lucky enough to get them yearly, etc.
Not a single coworker I've ever had worrying about tax brackets had to worry about the benefits cliff is up as that is. They were all people a little bit above that range who were tricked by people well above that range into believing people in that range were their enemies.
I'll bet she did. It's no surprise though. In my first job at 16 all these older gents would talk about it, and one day when I was more involved in the conversation I figured it was incorrect just due to it being illogical. Thankfully we now have Google, but it is strange to think of all these people who for 40 years etc. thought they'd lose money if they did one too many overtime shifts. They were floored by this new knowledge.
Yeah, but that's usually quite a different scenario. Disabled people really get shafted. But from what I've seen, it's middle-class and upper-middle-class Americans who are the likeliest to believe this myth. And it's often the same people who think that Joe Biden's increased tax plan for people making millions is going to affect them, a manager at Planet Fitness, because of course they're about to make it big. It's sort of like how Republicans turned the term estate tax, which only applies to estates worth over $25 million or something, into the label of death tax, which sounds like a scary malevolent government program that rips away what you've worked hard your whole life to leave to your children.
A shocking number of people either cheat their way through college and/or only cram for tests and never actually learn the material.
I'm an engineer and I hear coworkers complaining about how bonuses are taxed, skeptical smiley face.
A lot of times bonuses have tax withholding at a much higher rate even though the bonus isn't taxed differently from the rest of your income. So a lot of people incorrectly think the taxes are higher on bonuses. This confusion is way more common, and at least a little more understandable, than the tax bracket stuff.
It's definitely a non-zero chance. I tried to explain to a coworker who had been in industry for 10 years, with an engineering degree and an MBA, that our taxes are progressive, and what it really meant to go up. I gave up after an hour and a half. Which one of us do you think is a director now?
I'm insulted by a third and fourth thing now. You are so dumb that you don't know how taxes work. You are my...
I'll guess it was that tweet, meme going around that said that Sanders was gonna raise the minimum wage from to $15 per hour and then tax everyone 50%, so everyone made. My uncle posted that one and I pointed out that under Bernie Sanders' plan, IRC, you paid 0% in taxes until $50,000 a year. He then huffily replied that didn't matter because taxes were theft no matter what. Daily reminder that, red state, voters of Florida voted for $15 per hour minimum wage in 2020 because material conditions matter.
Occasionally, there is a benefits cliff, where, say, some program or tax credit is available only to people who make under a certain amount. Good program design is to avoid this. Something like, for every $5 more you make, you get $1 less of this benefit, makes it so it's always better to earn more. but there are some where it's a sharp cutoff.
Also college tuition, scholarship. I went to a top school for $1,000 per year out of pocket, and was lucky that my single mum made nothing. It's the lower middle class that gets having to pay tuition these days.
Exactly. In the US, but I knew someone who had got a small raise and put them above a hard cut-off and lost free childcare, and paying for it privately was almost twice the cost of the raise. It's more common than it should be. Luckily they had grandparents that stepped in to watch the kids a lot of the days.